Sabah al-Khair. Good morning, dear listeners. You're listening to Radio 3CR on 855 AM and Palestine Remembered with Robert Martin, Nasser Mashni and Yusuf Ahmed al-Rimawi.
Palestine Remembered is Australia's only English-language radio program that is totally dedicated to Palestine. We'd like to welcome those listening on 855 and those that will join us on podcast at 3cr.org.au.
Thanks for joining us. Stay with us and enjoy the episode.
Good morning, Melbourne. Continuing our theme of magnificent women who join us on Palestine Remembered, we're joined by Danielle, who's back in Australia, but we're going to take you through her story. Good morning, Danielle. How are you?
Good morning, Nasser. I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, really well. Now, Danielle, we've had a series of 3 women recently appear on Palestine Remembered, and this is, accidentally, but a recognition of International Women's Week. But we had Mel from Badil and Janine from Australia, and now I've got you, Danielle. Now, Danielle, you're an Australian woman, and you've come to Palestine. Can you tell us your journey, how you got to knowing about Palestine?
Yeah, sure. So my background has been to work in humanitarian contexts for the last 10 years or so. So Palestine was the most recent place that I was, and I was there for the longest time because it spoke to me in a way that the other contexts hadn't spoke to me. But prior to that, I was also in other countries across Africa, the Middle East and Asia as well, working as a humanitarian. Growing up here in Melbourne, I have my parents, my mum's background is Lebanese, so there has been this natural draw to the Middle East. I don't speak Arabic, and so in many ways I feel like a fake Arabic person because I reach Middle Eastern countries and people expect me to be from there. They can see from my face that I have some background from the Middle East, but because I haven't grown up there and I don't have the language, I'm a little bit of an outsider, but also part of the family. And the culture of the Middle East has felt somehow like home to me. So I feel really natural and comfortable living in the Middle East, and the hospitable nature is really common to my family. So over the past, sort of since 2011, when I started working as a humanitarian and I started in Africa, I've been across some of the most devastating contexts in the world, I think. I haven't been to places like Iraq or Afghanistan, but I've been to some very difficult places. However, reaching to Palestine, and in particular for me, Gaza, I'm still deeply moved and shocked by the lack of equality and injustice that we see there, and that the world continues to sort of watch on or not watch as things unfold in that space. And it has deeply touched my heart.
So aside from your humanitarian work, 2.5 years ago you end up in Gaza?
Yes, in 2016.
Okay. And you spent how long?
Yeah, I was 2.5 years there. So I got back about a year ago.
About a year ago. So 2.5 years in Gaza. Okay, day one getting there, how was that?
So I was really lucky, I think, because, and that's something that I've found having met many Palestinians who've not been able to get inside Gaza, even people in the West Bank who have family in Gaza and who have not been able to see their family for a long time and cannot even reach Jerusalem. It's quite shocking to see this disconnection of culture, which is on purpose as well. But for me, because I started off working actually for the United Nations, I was working for UNICEF for a short mission. And that time I was really working to help restore the water and sanitation in Gaza after the 2014 war. So even though it was 2016, by the time I was sent to Gaza, things still had not resumed. Even now, there's still so many things that still need to be fixed from the impacts of 2014. And because I was always wanting to go to Gaza, actually, when the war happened in 2014, I'd been in Jordan working for the Syrian conflict, and I desperately wanted to go and support, and seeing what happened in 2014 had really touched me. So when I had the opportunity, I saw a position where I could be a water and sanitation engineer in Gaza for UNICEF. I just jumped at it, and that was sort of my first foothold inside Gaza. And once there, I was able to, actually people met me, I made contacts, and I was able to get another job, which then gave me another 2 years inside Gaza.
And so what was that next project?
So then I ended up running the office for Action Against Hunger, which is a Spanish non-government organisation. It's much smaller than the UN, and it's in so many ways offered me much more freedom than I would have had working within the UN system, which I had done for a few years. Working for an NGO, though, you get paid almost nothing. It was the least paying job I've ever had. But it was such an opportunity to stay in Gaza and to work amongst the people there who I wanted to be there, and I wanted to support this cause. And my role was to run an office we had eventually about 30 to 40 staff who were doing various programs from, again, water and sanitation projects through to providing women with opportunities to run their own businesses and to have agricultural projects and various different kind of livelihood projects.
So because the reality is Israel portrays Gaza as, a hotbed of terrorism, and everybody in Gaza is a Hamas operative, and they just want to drive every Jew into the sea, and they're terrible human beings, which is why we can keep it an open-air prison. But tell us a reality, just a normal day. It's Tuesday, you've woken up to the sound of prayer. What's life like?
Yeah. It's definitely not as you just described. So for me,
they're lying. I can't believe it.
Surprise. I would wake up. I mean, I had a beautiful place next to the Mediterranean Sea, and I think the first thing that shocks me, the first thing that shocked me and shocks everybody when they enter Gaza for the first time, is actually how it doesn't meet your expectations. So we've seen on the news this sort of very dark image of a place where there's lots of, smoke, especially, the news since 2014 up till today, it's really this, burning tyres. So there's this smoke, there's people throwing stones, there's grey, dark kind of thing. And then you arrive in Gaza and you're on the Mediterranean coast. And there's a city, there's, of course, there's a huge population in Gaza, there's high-rise buildings, and from the first view of Gaza, you don't see what you have imagined. You don't see a people suffering, you don't see a place that's just ridden by war. You see lovely people. I wake up in the morning, to the sound of the prayer, the call to prayer. And then you hear people selling fruit on the streets. You have the diversity of people still on donkey carts and with horses. And then you have cars driving next to them. So you have this real diversity from one end of people just living a really normal life as they would, as we have still, Bedouin communities there. And then you have, businessmen and businesswomen who are running around in a daily hustle. So it's much like any city. Until you sort of dig a little bit beneath the surface, and then you see how it is different.
So how is it different? Let's dig a little bit.
So I think obviously the politics of the situation means that no matter how hard we tried, and that's something that kind of, it's really hard to live with, because I worked there for 2.5 years and I struggle to see the impact of my work because I'm unable to make a political change. And so obviously a lot of what's happening in Gaza is impacted by politics, either from the Israeli side or also from, the feuding between the two Palestinian factions, Fatah and Hamas. And the impacts of that on the people in Gaza is the lack of electricity, I think, is just the core feature of daily life. When I was there, it varies, but when I was there was 4 hours of electricity every day. And this just has a huge impact for so many things. We have raw sewage being pumped out to sea at a quantity that we cannot imagine. So you look at the beautiful Mediterranean Sea and it is just full of shit and literal. You smell it. You wake up in the morning and you open your window and you can smell that coming from the sea. So although you see something beautiful, and this is what I think Gaza is, you see something beautiful, but then there's always some sort of challenge beneath that. So some people still go to the sea on a hot day, but there's no respite. Where do you go? You can't have an air conditioning running because there's no electricity. A lot of people don't even have fans. The elderly, there's no, the lift so Gaza being one of the most populated areas in the world, there's lots of high-rise buildings, so people live, in huge, tall buildings, but with no electricity, how do you reach, the floor that your house is on? So you have to wait for that specific moment where the generator will be run and you pay a fee for the generator to be put on exactly at, maybe it's 2:00, and then you can go up in the lift. Otherwise, you have to walk up these endless flights of stairs, and for the elderly and the young and the sick and the pregnant, that's just impossible. So this electricity, the lack of electricity affects every part of life. The hospitals don't run the way they should. Dialysis patients have constantly at risk of not being able to receive the treatment that they need. From, children who are born prematurely, they're at risk. Every part of the life is impacted by the fact that there's no electricity or limited electricity. The water is contaminated. Only people who have enough money to pay for a generator are able to really live a fairly normal life.
In spite of that, people get married.
They do.
Children.
All the time.
Have birthday parties. What an inspirational story. I mean, that's the doom and gloom, and we speak about it often here, and the reality of the pressure cooker. I mean, you hermetically seal 2 million people, air, land, sea, calculate the daily calorific intake of food required and only allow that in, and then turn on the power for 2 to 4 hours a day. It's amazing that they haven't, it's not worse sometimes, I think. But how about a good story? Tell us, share a memory of a happy occasion.
I think for me, it's I'm not sure if we can call it resilience. There's certainly an element of resilience, but this acceptance of life and that they will make the most of what they've got. I think this is truly inspirational. Every day I would come to the office, and I've come from here. I come from Melbourne. I'm extraordinarily lucky. And so when I come to work, sometimes I'm the one who's like, God, guys, this is terrible. How? And people are still smiling and they're still getting on with life in a way that just would uplift me and enable me to do my job every day. And one beautiful example for me is the women who, in so many ways, their lives they don't have the same access to opportunities that I have. So I'm able to be working in Gaza with them. And I had a particularly, I'm not sure what it is about the Gazan women, but every woman I seemed to encounter was incredibly intelligent, incredibly well educated, as are the men. But the women have this fire inside them, which is truly inspirational.
Awesome.
And we would often have these women's days where we would go to a chalet. So I don't know, this term chalet for me was really unusual, but it's basically, it's a huge thing in Gaza. There's houses along the beach or even inland where they'll have walls so that there is privacy, and you can hire them for a day or overnight even. And it's quite a business, I think. So the business people have managed to make a business out of this in Gaza. And you can hire this chalet, which is just a house with a pool usually. And we would all go, the women from my office, we would all get together and we'd meet at this chalet. And for one day, we would pump the music by the pool. We'd be dancing, belly dancing around together, and just telling stories. Women who, most of the women they don't know how to swim because they're not, able to do that growing up. Some who had access to pools could, but very few. So they're all, with their blow-up armbands, like little kids have here, the floaties, exactly. With their floaties getting in the pool, teaching each other how to swim, teaching each other how to dance, with the music blaring. And I was, it was interesting for me the first time I went to one of these functions because I was like, okay, day by the pool, grab my book, we're going to sit in silence on my towel, not dressing up, wearing my shorts and a T-shirt, and I get there and the women are glammed up. This is their moment to really enjoy together, and this camaraderie and this just, I don't even know how to describe it. I would just sit there watching them and smiling. It made me so happy to see all of these women who just were letting go. They, for their whole lives, they have such a responsibility as mother, as wife, as often they're like the breadwinner for the family. And then we have these moments on a weekend where we could get together, eat food, drink juice, dance around, and just let our hair down. And it was amazing for me to see that, and just to see how we find fun when, there's no nightclubs in Gaza, there's no pubs, there's not the same, even cinemas. It's really hard to find entertainment, and people there are often really bored, and this is the way that they find their enjoyment. So I always loved those days.
Yeah. Look, my cheeks are hurting from smiling so much, but it sounds like pure, unadulterated joy. Liberated from any sense of occupation and oppression. That's in right. That very moment, they're just citizens of Earth.
Absolutely.
It happen all the time. Stay tuned and join us after this break.
You're listening to 3CR Community Radio 855 AM. Visit the 3CR website at 3cr.org.au/podcast to hear the most recent recording from each show, or 3cr.org.au/streaming to listen live.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We're joined by Danielle, who's sharing with us her 2.5 years in Palestine. Now, Danielle, before you left, we had President Trump decide to recognise Jerusalem as Israel's capital, a unified Jerusalem, on Nakba Day, which the Palestinians in Gaza decided to protest. You were there, Danielle, when Israelis took up elevated positions and using high-powered scopes and high-powered rifles decided to kill tens of Palestinians and injure many, many others. Can you tell us about that day?
Yeah, it was I think in my whole life, it's probably the worst day of my life. For a couple of reasons. One was, we'd known that we kind of expected this to happen. The return march had been going on for about 6 weeks prior. It started on the 30th of March, and every Friday people were going to the fence to demonstrate, and it started as this really beautiful resistance movement, which was each Friday there was a different theme. So I don't know how much of that made it to the news, especially in Australia, but each Friday they would go in, they would have like the burning of the tyres was the first one, then there was burning of flags, and there was various different themes that were being used, and it was families taking their children to the fence, setting up picnics not too far away. Most of the area along the fence is agricultural land, and even in a normal day, Israel has there's what's called I think the buffer zone, or I think that's the term we use, where you can't actually go within a certain distance of the fence. So somewhere it's like 200 metres, but Israel determine what that distance is. So up to areas particularly where there's probably fertile agricultural land and people could make a bit of a business, it tends to be closer to 1 kilometre, 1.5 kilometres, and Israel will come in and very regularly will come and destroy those areas and shoot at people who might be in that space. So this fence is contentious anyway, and people were taking this opportunity to set up these points along the fence, but to make it a peaceful protest. And as we've seen, Palestinians generally have a lot less in the way of weapons than the Israelis, so it was really about, flying flags and throwing rocks and dancing, and people were doing dabka along the fence, and there was a huge kind of community sense to the return march. We, as the international community inside Gaza, knew that there was a big potential that this was going to flare up on the 14th of March and the 14th of May, sorry. And with the decision of Trump to declare Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, that this was going to be a very important day. And so we were planning for war. We had gathered together as a community and worked out ways that how we thought this war was going to unfold based on what had happened in the previous wars that we'd seen over the past decade. And in some ways, there was such a excitement leading to this moment where I think Palestinians were like, this is our opportunity to really push for what we believe is right, and we want to go home. We want to go to our lands on the other side of this fence. The inhumane response of Israel to the thousands of people who had turned up at the fence that day, because, I mean, busloads of people were bussed into the fence. It was a real gathering of solidarity, and the Israelis responded with such force that I find absolutely shocking in terms of they thought they could get away with it, and they have gotten away with it, which I think is the worst part. From my end, I was inside Gaza, although we had evacuated most of our staff that we thought were non-essential, but I was still inside with a few international staff, not many, but we were planning in case this did escalate to a war. How would we respond? What would we be able to do? How could we provide food to people? If people were separated from other parts of Gaza, we had many, many plans in place. And on the day, all I could do, which I think is why it touched me so deeply, was that all I could do was watch the news. I'm sitting in my office, again with beautiful views of the Mediterranean Sea, and I can just hear ambulances going past my window. And there were ambulances every 2 minutes. I actually stood on my balcony and looked at my watch, and every 2 minutes, someone who was injured or dying or dead was going past my window. Now, I did have an office which was fairly close to Al-Shifa Hospital, which is the largest hospital in Gaza, but even so, I couldn't even imagine how many people were affected by the violence that day. And all I could do was sit and watch. And I found that to be so disempowering. And I think that became a little bit of why Palestinians were still going. So people knew the risk and they would still go because they could at least take some control over their situation. So for me that day was just watching numbers on a screen increase, the numbers of dead, the numbers of injured, the numbers of people whose lives would be impacted forever. You had families who lost their breadwinning husband or their son who was going to be, their person to look after them and their families, women left widowed, people who had been injured in particularly their legs. So Israel mostly focused on hitting people in the leg, which meant that the impact on the health system would just be huge for years and years and years to come. So just that day, although it was one day, the impact of that will go forever, for a very long time anyway. And I think after that, it was the 14th of May and it was the 15th that we had expected it really to blow up. And overnight there were some kind of political conversations between Israel and others, and Hamas and Egypt, I believe. And so on the 15th, people in Gaza were ready. They wanted this to escalate. They wanted the world to see what was happening in Gaza. And the biggest disappointment to the Gazans was that on the 15th, nothing happened. And that feeling of coming into Gaza itself was so quiet. I can't remember it being so quiet. And getting to work on the morning of the 15th and sort of waiting, what's happening next? And people were so disappointed that Hamas, who at that point were, really in control of the negotiations, had given in to whatever it was that had happened overnight. They wanted to keep fighting, and they felt like all the loss, all the people that had died, all the people who had gone to that fence and demonstrated, all that loss was for nothing. And so it was a real sense of disappointment. And we had been planning for this war, and I think, sadly, as conflicting internally it was for me, we almost wanted a war because we just wanted to scream from our depths of our lungs, look here, pay attention to what's going on here, come and help change this situation. And nothing happened. And still nothing happens. And I think that's, for me, the Great Return March was just, and it continued and it continued. I don't know if it's still going on now, but yeah. And it got to this point where people die every Friday and people stop paying attention, and another person dies and another person is injured, and the world just turns their back and gets on with life, and people just forget. And I think for me, the story of Gaza is a story of trying to get people to pay attention. And that return march was really, can the international community please, pay attention and help us? And that call went unanswered.
And remains to go unanswered. I mean, the reality is the Great Return March happens every Friday, and that whilst the number of dead has diminished, and because the public relations exercise of Israel's machine to cleanse, make it look better. I mean, the reality is we've been dehumanised to a level, they're brown, Muslim, anti-Semites. We can shoot them with impunity. Everybody's dealing with this same scourge of radical Islam, and us killing them, we're just saving them from you. So we're at that level of why it doesn't get reported in the media. But then there's only so many people you can kill from a sniper's vantage point. So then the order goes out, just maim them, take out some knees. And we had a report come out last week in Israeli papers, and it was reported in Haaretz, and there's some quotes by some of these former snipers, bragging. I kept the casing of every round I fired, said one of them. I have them in my room, so I don't have to make up an estimate. I know 52 definite hits. Is 52 a lot, was the question. I haven't really thought about it. It's not hundreds of liquidations like in the movie American Sniper. We're talking about knees. I'm not making light of it. I shot a human being, but still, where do you stand in comparison to others who served in your battalion? From the point of view of hits, I have the most. In my battalion, they would say, look, here comes the killer. When I come back from the field, they would ask, well, how many did you shoot today? You have to understand that before we showed up, knees were the hardest thing to rack up. There was a story about one sniper who had 11 knees all told, and people thought no one could outdo him. And then I bought 7, 8 knees in one day within a few hours. I almost broke his record. I mean, this is an Israeli sniper who served on the border, bragging about his killing. I mean, I don't like often talking about the degradation of Israeli society, but we're actually getting to a really terrible place. We've only got a minute to go, Danielle. Perhaps one more uplifting story.
That's a hard thing to back up from there. Look, I think today, I think the people of Gaza just who still stay there and who make the choice to stay inside Gaza as their show of resistance. My hats go off to them because they're living a tough life, and in some cases they can get out and they can find a better life for themselves. But on behalf of all of us, they're staying in there and still being happy and still accepting where they are and making the most of every day. And I think it's for them that, we should keep fighting.
Fantastic. The greatest support we can show our Palestinian brothers and sisters is to remain resilient, and they're staying steadfast. And, we're not going anywhere. So free Palestine. Thanks so much, Danielle.
Thank you.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound, saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, I was blind, I was poor and hungry. Amazing grace set me free. Set me free. Good people been here more than 10,000 years. Everyone bright as a shining sun. We've got no less days to sing God's praise from the time that we began. It will be grace that will bring us safe